Hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for today's seminar, part of the ongoing Carleton University Disability Research Group series, Access, Inclusion, and Disability, Connecting Scholars and Practitioners. I'm Ryan Patterson with the CUDRG and the Carleton Accessibility Institute. I'm a white man, glasses, brown parted hair, short brown beard, no mustache. We are also joined by the series co-organizers, Professor Dominique Marshall and Natalie Amato, our two speakers, and a wonderful international audience. While this seminar is virtual, we acknowledge that Carleton University campus is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. And we're fortunate to have two stellar scholar practitioners with us today to discuss the importance of participatory research with individuals with disabilities and human-centered design. Dr. Adrian Chan, Professor of Systems and Computer Engineering at Carleton and Director of both ALL, the Abilities Living Laboratory, and READY, Research and Education in Accessibility Design and Innovation, among other things. And Dr. Atul Jaiswal, Research Operations Manager at Bruyère Research Institute, American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine Inaugural Chair in Integrating Sensory Health and Rehabilitation in Aging Research, and review editor of the journal Disability, Rehabilitation, and Inclusion, again, among several other things. Please note that we've muted all of you until the discussion portion of the seminar at the end, and that this event is being recorded to eventually be hosted on the CUDRG website. So as I pass to Adrian to begin, please join me visually, either on camera or with Zoom reaction images, in welcoming both of our speakers. And take it away, Adrian.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Adrian Chan. I'm a Chinese male, black hair, glasses, no facial hair, wearing a blue shirt, coming to you from home, which is also on the traditional unceded land of the Algonquin Nation. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so everyone can see my screen there. And yeah, just to, I guess, situate myself before I proceed with my presentation, I want to first acknowledge that I don't identify as a person with a disability. So I come into my work with the disability community as hopefully acting as an ally and accomplice and moving towards a more inclusive and accessible society. And this, I think, reflects a lot of the work I do with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so in addition to when I work with the disability community, I also try to be, again, an ally and an accomplice for gender equality, for Indigenous populations, and other equity-denied communities as well. So my initial talk is kind of just giving a high-level view of how I kind of look at participatory research, and it's going to come from my background, which is engineering. So a lot of this will have a design lens to it. In terms of engineering research, a lot of the work that I do is a kind of applied research, and so a relationship between research and design is quite coupled, I guess, between the two of them. But hopefully you can kind of see the links between them as well. This is an often kind of cartoon that we see here about designing a tree swing that we see in terms of design. And it just talks about how different stakeholders need to be engaged in the different parts of design. And so on the top left, it shows a tree swing. This is what the customer described, and you show a tree swing with kind of 3 levels of seating and stuff like that. And so not quite what a tree swing should be. What got budgeted, so it's just a rope on a tree. What the engineer designed, which is a tree swing that doesn't actually swing, it goes through the trunk. And the next one is how manufacturing installed it. So it's a tree that was basically cut in the middle, so it can swing, but it destroys the tree. But marketing and advertise, so it's a kind of like a luxury sofa on a tree. What got documented, which is everything's absent in the scene. what the customer finally received, which is a tree swing just wrapped around the trunk and on the ground, what the customer was billed for, which is an amusement park roller coaster ride, and then finally what the customer actually wanted, which is simply a tire swing on a rope attached to a tree. And really what this kind of tries to communicate is the need, I guess, for engagement of all stakeholders in the research and design process. Quite a bit of the work that I do as a biomedical engineer in the disability community surrounds assisted technology. And so one of the things that we learned early on was assistive technology abandonment. And so the intent of designing new and researching new assistive technology, of course, is that it should hopefully improve the quality of life and participation of people who are using the assistive technology. But constantly, when you look at statistics about assistive technology, there's a high level of abandonment. Typically, you'll see about 20 to 30% of assistive devices reported to be abandoned by users. And there are different factors that are identified. The first was a lack of consideration of user opinion in selection. Again, the need, therefore, of including the user there. Easy device procurement, so how easy it is to acquire it. Again, it's a user issue associated with it. Poor device performance, which can be a user or a design issue there. And changing user needs or priorities. And so over time, a person's needs and preferences may evolve. And again, the ability for a user perspective to be included into this is again vital. Liz Jackson, who's a disability advocate in the States, came across this term that she coined, this disability dongle, which she describes as a well-intended, elegant, yet useless solution to a problem we never knew we had. Disability dongles are most often conceived of and created in design schools and at IDEO. And I came across this through Twitter when this particular thing came up, which is this wheelchair that is a stair climbing wheelchair. And from an engineering perspective, it was kind of fascinating because the difficulty to have a wheeled device climb stairs is quite remarkable. But it blew up on Twitter because people were like, well, this is from a technology perspective quite interesting. It is not something that people want. Wheelchair users were saying, you know, this looks like something that is dangerous and would just scare me to death. We don't need these expensive high technology solutions. What we need is our environments to be designed in an accessible manner, provide ramps and elevators and avoid things like staircases. And so it reminds me of this idea that good research and good design should be useful, usable, and used. And those are three related but different kind of things, right? Useful, so it actually serves a purpose. Usable, so that people can actually use it. And used, so that actually people do use it. And you'll see throughout time in the research and design space where one of these things are often missing. And we need to progress in a manner that kind of satisfies these three kind of pillars. If you look back, and even now, I suppose, what kind of motivates this type of research and design in with the disability community, it can come from multiple different kind of levels. Oftentimes, it has good intent, but it can come from a sense of pity or sympathy, where you want to do good and solve a problem for someone else. And what it's lacking, though, is that idea of empathy and compassion, which is I feel with you and I'm moved by you, and I actually want to do something with you to actually overcome a barrier. And that's a different take than, and I think results in a different solution depending on the motivation. And so those that derive from this idea of pity or sympathy often doesn't have that type of full engagement and can often result in poor outcomes like these disability dongles. When we talk about participatory research, I liken this to human-centered design. And so it's this involvement of stakeholders within the entire research and design process. And I like this particular diagram, which comes from this paper by Mark Steen, Tensions in Human-Centered Design. And it has two axes. On the x-axis, it says here, move of researchers and designers towards the users. And on the right side, it says move of users towards researchers and designers. And so on the left, what it's saying is that as research and designers, we need to move ourselves towards end users or stakeholders. On the right, though, it's talking about taking these stakeholders and having them fully engaged as researchers and designers. On the y-axis, you can see this on the bottom of it. It says concern of what is a research orientation, and then on the top, concern of what could be a design orientation. And so the bottom is more of like descriptive of what's actually going on. On the top is what our world could be and should be, perhaps. And so what you'll see here is the different types of human-centered design. On the bottom left is ethnography as an example. You can see participatory design on the bottom right, empathetic design on the top left, and then co-design on the top right. And you will, in recent years, you'll hear a lot more about this idea of co-design. And the reason why is it focuses on what could be and what should be. And so it's a future-oriented kind of view. When we think about research, it is about that level of progression towards something that is more accessible and inclusive. And then this idea of moving users towards researchers and designers, I think that acknowledgement that, and this has actually always been the case, where people with disabilities are researchers and designers, and often yet not acknowledged as such, in addition to the barriers that they potentially face to be researchers and designers. And the more that we move towards this co-design, I think the more that we see more productive and useful outcomes. Pictured on the right is an example. This is an industrial design student, Anna Verhoeven, who's engaging with an older adult in her design process for technology to assist with aging. All of this, I think, is well aligned with the nothing about us without us, which is a strong motto that comes from the disability community, that full engagement is needed to be there. And this is aligned with different ways of accessible and inclusive design. Pictured on the right is a diagram from Yuva Trevenis from OCAD, and talks about this kind of cyclical nature of research and design. And each cycle, you're looking at who is excluded from the research and design, and in each iteration, trying to work towards something that is more inclusive. And the results then can become more resilient, more adaptable, more innovative, more accessible, and more inclusive. And I think we see this particularly over the past few years with COVID as an example. As one example, as an attempt to be more inclusive and more accessible, we had instigated hybrid teaching a number of years ago. And when COVID hit and we moved towards an online delivery, that transition for myself was much more easier because we had it already set up to be a resilient kind of modality. And so that there was an ease of transition there because we were thinking of trying to make things a bit more inclusive at the onset. The other part I think of, when I think about participatory design and inclusive design as well, is whether or not we are solving the correct problems. So this is some work that came out of one of my master's students, Lindsay McCauley. She was looking at accessibility related to skiing. And, coming into the topic without any background, we were just kind of exploring with kind of eyes open and just kind of exploring the landscape. Our initial thought would be that we'd be focusing upon adaptive ski equipment. And Lindsay did a fantastic job and embedded herself with the adaptive skiing community and just experiencing and talking with people. and kind of discovered, well, adaptive ski equipment is sometimes a bit hacked. It's kind of like foam and tape and things like that, and just get things to work. People were generally happy with the adaptive skiing equipment. It was kind of hacked together, but it worked, and it got people to ski. This diagram here that I'm showing here is an emotion diagram that she created by interviewing people with disabilities who were skiing and looking at the entire journey, everything from preparing to leave home to arrive at the parking lot, going to the lodge, entering the lodge, getting ready, going outside, getting to the lift line, riding the lift, to actually downhill ski, go back to the lodge for a meal or a break, return to skiing, return to the lodge at the end of the ski day, and leaving the ski hill. And what you see here is the different levels of emotion here. And if you look at the part where they're actually skiing, they're actually quite happy. Everything from the lifts and things like that. And so, that actual experience of the skiing part was actually not bad. The parts where you can see kind of emotions going towards the negative part were really going to the lodge, entering the lodge, and leaving the ski hill, which point to different aspects surrounding skiing that was making the entire ski experience less accessible. And so this was really interesting because, without engaging end users, we might be solving or focusing our efforts on the wrong problem, which would have been the adaptive ski equipment. When we're looking at the results show that it was more of the entire chain of events. And if any of those events, again, are inaccessible, then the entire experience can be considered inaccessible. And then I bring up this diagram here. This is a nice diagram. I have the fortune of chairing one of the EDI councils for my faculty. And this idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion is always, these three things are often put together, but not necessarily well disaggregated. And I like this diagram because it kind of pulls apart when we talk about equity, inclusion, diversity, how they are separate from one another, what happens at the intersections of them, and what happens when something is missing. And so, when it talks about diversity, it's talking about the representation of multiple identities, inclusion, that thoughts, ideas, and perspectives of all individuals matter, and equity, the constantly and consistently recognizing and redistributing power. And then the intersection of all three of these things is a sense of belonging, where the full potential of individuals thrive. And what in particular I want to point out here is this idea of equity. Oftentimes we focus on diversity representation and on inclusion, both listening to ideas and giving them full consideration. But that part of equity, I like this idea that they say constantly and consistently recognizing and redistributing power, which I think is an important aspect. And it reminds me again about this idea of designers with disabilities and researchers with disabilities. And so there's this nice post that talks about moving from design for to design with to design by. And what they mean by that is this, again, this redistribution of power, right? And so the design for is this kind of paternalistic kind of view of, we're the experts and we will design for the disability community. Design with is where we're kind of mainly heading towards, where we have this equity, kind of a partnership model here. But if we think about the equity model of designing by, then this is the idea of equity of both redistributing power and acknowledging designers with disabilities and researchers with disabilities. Throughout my experience at Carleton, I've had the fortune to work with many folks with disabilities, including researchers with disabilities. And it is interesting, it's not just interesting, but also the barriers that are faced are just incredible as well. So as one example, as a researcher, one of the things that we need to do is to get grant money to fund the research in our activities and stuff like that. This is a snapshot, screenshot of the Convergence portal, which is one of the main funding agency, a tri-council portal. And one of the researchers that I was trying to collaborate with needed to register themselves so they could be added as a research partner to the application here. And one of the parts you have to identify is your area of fields of research. And so when you click on adding your fields of research, it brings up this pop-up window. And this pop-up window has a list of all the different field options that you can select from. And on the screen here, you can see it has 5 listed here: algebra, number theory, algebraic and differential geometry, metric geometry, fractal geometry. And then there's a scroll button, so you can go down that list on that particular page. And then on the bottom, you can see that there's 147 pages. And so even for myself, trying to figure out where I fit into this was cumbersome and difficult to navigate. For my particular collaborator, it was simply impossible. And so it took a number of back and forth offline for us to kind of work together. And in the end, I basically had to log into their account on their behalf and navigate through the portal themselves. And these type of barriers, again, if you think about this idea of, again, of the chain of events of research, if we're looking at redistributing power and enabling researchers with disabilities to engage in that process, we also have to look at the entire process as well. I am glad to be part of Carleton, which is trying to be shown as trying to set itself as a leader in the area. I was fortunate to help co-lead the coordinated accessibility strategy, which has a focus area on research and development in this area of accessibility. And it's recognizing, again, not only the activities related in disability, but as well pulling up that capacity of researchers with disabilities as well. Over the past few years, I've been the lead for READY, Research in Education and Accessibility Design and Innovation, which is a training program for graduate students, which provides graduate students with training in the area of accessibility to supplement their normal graduate program. And in a similar kind of way, in addition to kind of having accessibility content there, we try to also ensure the delivery of the program itself is accessible. And I think we have some good successes in that the participation rate of students with disabilities is significantly exceeding the enrollment rate that we would normally see with graduate studies, which is fantastic. And so again, it's this enabling kind of program in that sense. And then I'm establishing the Abilities Living Lab, which is an accessibility research lab that hopefully will be launched this year. This serves as kind of a community hub where researchers at the university can interface with community partners as well. And in a similar way, we're looking at the accessibility of the lab itself. Traditional engineering labs are often inaccessible. They're filled with equipment from even a basic physical accessibility perspective. It doesn't allow participation for people with disabilities. And so we're very intentful in trying to, again, ensure full participation of researchers with disabilities as well. And so, when I'm thinking about this area, again, it is not only, again, the participation of people with disabilities in the research process, but hopefully over time we'll see more being led by researchers with disabilities. So I just wanted to give this more of this high-level overview of things, and I want to now turn the floor to Dr. Jaiswal, who is going to give more of on the ground and seeing this kind of participatory research in action.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. I will just first share my screen. Is it good? Is it visible?
All set.
Okay,
Yeah, great.
Okay. Yeah, so I think you all know me by now, but still I would just introduce myself. I'm Atul Jaiswal. I'm a heterosexual, able-bodied male in mid-30s with brown skin color, black eyes and hairs, born and raised in India, first-generation immigrant, and landed in Canada in 2015 to pursue my PhD in rehab science from Queen's University. I'm married. I'm a father of a 3-year-old daughter. With respect to my training in the field of rehab, I'm a trained occupational therapist as well as a trained rehabilitation social worker with specialization in disability studies. I'm a rehab scientist coming from developing world, that is India, and now settled in developed world, that is Canada, with a passion to teach, research, and be a change. My PhD in rehab science from Queens was focused on identifying ways to enhance social participation of individuals with combined hearing and vision impairment using the international classification of functioning framework given by World Health Organization. And my work aims to develop and use participatory research methodologies that could help the inclusion of sensory disabilities research in the mainstream research. Today, I'll take this opportunity to extend this conversation led by Dr. Chan and underscore the importance of participatory research with special focus on those with sense impairment. Just to note that I'll be focusing most of my talk on vision and hearing impairment, specifically in my talk, and we'll be using the term impairment and loss interchangeably. And currently, I'm working as Research Operations Manager at Bruyère Research Institute. So thank you so much for having me here for this Carleton University Disability Research Group Seminar Series. I'm sincerely thankful to Dr. Dominic Marcel, Dr. Ryan Patterson for this opportunity, and thank you, Natalie, for coordinating this talk. I acknowledge that I live, work, and raise my family in the city of Ottawa, which is on traditional homeland of the people of Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I thank my funders, search partners, and Shadrian Gilman panel members, without whose support this research would not have been possible that I'm going to share with you. So this is the outline of my talk today. So I'll be talking about sense impairment, a little bit of its impact, helpful strategies, and learning from research study that I conducted in Global South, that is in India, and Global North, that is here. Sense impairment specific considerations for accessibility in research, and that's more going from my own understanding what worked, what did not. So let me start by setting the stage about sensory loss. Hearing loss, what is hearing loss? So hearing loss refers to loss of hearing greater than 26 decibel in the better hearing ear. Age-related sensory neural hearing loss is also called as presbyogenesis. It's the most common type in older adults. Patient may present with self-recognized hearing loss, or family members may observe behavior such as difficulty understanding conversations, increasing television volume that suggests hearing loss. Vision loss is defined as visual acuity worse than 0.3 log MAR, which is also called as 20/40 or 60/6/12 using Snell chart, where mild vision loss or low vision is acuity worse than 20/40, and blindness is acuity worse than 20/200. Visual acuity is the ability to see details clearly, regardless of the distance of the object. A combination of hearing and vision loss is referred to as dual sensory loss, and it can range from anyone having low vision and hard of hearing to all the way to total deafness and total blindness, which was the case of, you all know, Helen Keller. So I think I would like to set the stage first again with this question, that does sense impairment really matter? Like, and how often we think about it. So this is a question that I would leave with all of you to just think about it, that in the work that we do, how much consideration we give to sense impairment. Let's see what World Report sort of highlights. So World Report on Hearing that came in 2021 estimated that 1.5 billion people currently experience hearing loss, while the World Report on Vision 2019 that estimated that 2.2 billion people experience vision loss globally. And a lot of these sort of cases could have been prevented. A 2015 report on global burnout disease estimated that hearing and vision impairment respectively ranked second and third of all impairments, contributing to the numbers of years lived with disability. In 2016, 2.7 million Canadians had a hearing impairment, 4 million had vision impairment, and 1.1 million had combination of hearing and vision impairment, which is called dual sensory loss. And this is based on the Canadian longitudinal study on aging data that was sort of first sort of data that was collected in 2016 itself. Globally, 1.5 billion people had hearing impairment, 2.2 had vision impairment, and 150 million had combination of both. So individuals with sensory disabilities, especially with those who have combination of both, are often sidelined in health and rehab research. And that's what is the intent of my whole talk, that how we can sort of integrate them into the work that we do. And evidence suggests that they are at high risk of cognitive decline, functional decline, social isolation, falls, depression, and mortality. They often are high users of healthcare services due to the comorbid conditions such as dementia, stroke, diabetes, and depression, to name a few. So here I highlight some of the common challenges experienced by individuals who have sensory loss. So So I'll just start first by dependency. With sensory loss, they come to your person has to be dependent on either technology or on other sort of members of their family or caregivers, and that is a challenge for them to accept, depending on which stage of their life they had this incidence of disability. There's also the stigma that is associated with using technology, as well as the stigma of having the disability. Often that leads to adaptations that are required by them to accommodate and to address the challenges that they are going through. So it could be adaptation to learn braille, it could be adaptation to their home. So all those adaptations are also part of their life, and it could be positive or negative, both ways. They also often have reduced social network and support, and that often leads to social isolation experiences. And because of the coexisting conditions that they might have, because so among older adults, dementia is very common, and stroke is also very common. Depression, anxiety is very common condition that is often considered as a primary sort of concern when they are brought to the healthcare setting. But often sensory impairment was of the first sort of concern that they were going through. Communication is often affected. So with respect to vision loss, because the people with vision loss, they are not able to see things properly. So that leads to the loss of visuals or non-verbal sort of expressions. And with people who have hearing loss, the loss of auditory input leads to communication challenges. So, and people who have combination of both, so both the things are compromised, and that's what leads to a unique challenges in their life. With this, now I'll sort of quickly present my learning from the three different studies that I have conducted. So I'll just first quickly show you the first one that comes from my work that I conducted. It's a participatory action research study that I conducted after my graduation from my master's in disability studies in India, where I came across a small rural village setting, and it's called Wangani, and with a total population of 5,000 people, including 300 families who had individuals with vision impairment living with them. So when I like the picture that you see on the screen is the actual scene where people are who have vision impairment, they're actually crossing the railway track, and that is a scenario. And that was a scenario that I was seeing very often, and I was really struggling to see why no one is doing anything here, and that's what pushed me to think, as a trained occupational therapist, as a trained social worker, as a trained disability studies scholar, if I'm not able to do anything here, I think there's no point of having all these degrees. That's what pushed me further, and then finally, with this help of participatory action research. So that was the new concept that I learned that time during my master, and really wanted to see whether it works or not. So finally, with the help of the individuals who have vision impairment from the same community, like the Wangani community, we sort of trained some of the people who had low vision, and they were educated enough to help me to conduct the survey. So we all came together from the idea inception that how to advocate for this change, that there was no foot over bridge, and people have to cross, including children have to cross the railway track every day, and that was something very uh, risky for their life. And often we came to know from people that there were some casualties as well in the past. So that's what sort of motivated us, and then we all came together. So it's not my journey. I think it's not my project. It was a whole community project that we identified as a research as a problem, and then but we realized that no one will understand what is happening in Wangani unless we have data, unless we have numbers, unless we are able to show them that there's a real concern of these people who are living there. So that's why we conducted this participatory action research, and the survey was conducted with 272 people who willingly sort of accepted to sort of share their data with us. And in the data, we asked one question that what is the most important concern that you have? And they said one sort of statement that still echoes with me, that we don't know every time when we go out of our house, we don't know whether we'll come back safely back to our house or not in the night. So that was a very sort of strong statement that I think that stuck with me. And with that, we really wanted to understand what to do next. So we did this whole research, and then because of my training in social work and disability studies, we had some ideas. So that's what we did. So initially, using the participatory action research, we had the data, we had the research data, and through that we prepared a whole report. And then the next thing was to show this whole issue to the rest of the world and to the people who actually need to see the gravity of the issue. We made a documentary, and I'm not going to show this, but this documentary is available on YouTube. If you really want to go and look at it, just type Wangani and blind, and you might see this. So and then we did this documentary that we prepared for 10 minutes. We had an online and offline signature campaign that we put together, and with that, you see this was put on change.org. And after this was done as a second step, then we had media advocacy that we did. So, and everything, all of this that you see on the screen is a sort of almost sort of, it took us 18 months of work that we did all together. So, but finally, this led to a confirmed victory when we had almost like 6,000 people across the globe supporting this sort of online petition. And finally, the Ministry of Railways in India, Government of India, they sanctioned 15 million, which is equivalent to 300,000 Canadian dollars, to construct a disabled-friendly foot-over bridge in Wangani. And this happened in 2013. Like it took us almost 2015 to get this sort of done, like the sanctioning done. And now finally, I'm showing you the picture here that you see on the screen is for April 2016 picture on the top. That was they were building the bridge, and finally in December 2016 the bridge was ready. So, and then we documented this whole thing with respect to as a paper, so that rest of the world can also see that this is when this is possible in India, it could be done anywhere across the globe as well. This was my first realization that research could lead to a change, and participatory approach is really incredible. So I think because I got a flavor of the success of things work, that gave me full motivation to now keep trying this idea and see whether I can take to a next level. While I was working in Wangani, I also realized that people who have single sense impairment, and people who have combination of hearing and impairment, so their experiences are very unique. So people who have combination of both, they have a unique set of challenges that people who have single sense impairment might not have at all. So because people who have single sense impairment, we can still use the other interactions like vision or hearing, which is intact, to compensate for the loss of the other sort of impaired sense. But for those who have combination of both, it was really hard to sort of deal with their day-to-day life challenges. So this is what brought me to the world of deaf blindness or dual sense errors, and to understand their experiences even more. I work with our international organization. It's called Sense International India, that works exclusively for 78,000 children and adults with deaf blindness in South Asia. So I worked there, and then after working over there, I realized that this is a perfect time for me to see whether I could do a PhD research in this space and sort of contribute to the literature that is limited in the space. So with this, I will sort of quickly introduce you to the world of deaf blindness. So 95% of what we learn is through eyes and ears. So you see how critical it is that if these two senses don't work properly, how critical it could be. So deaf blindness or dual sensory loss is a combination of hearing impairment in the same individual, and it affects access to information, communication, mobility, and functioning, and other challenges as well. But these are four are the top priority ones. And the varying combination of this results into a unique condition that is more disabling than some of its impairment. Presbyopia, age-related macular degeneration, cataract, glaucoma are some of the major causes of hearing and vision loss in older adults. I'll use this quote by Helen Keller, which rightly describes the situation of people with deaf blindness. It says, "Blindness cuts us from things, but deafness separates us from people," which makes it a unique disability because those with only vision or hearing impairment could still compensate to perform their function, but those with dual sensory loss, it's not possible to compensate, and they have their unique set of challenges. But now I'm going to talk about some of the numbers. So in terms of numbers, current estimates from the global report on deaf blindness that came in 2018, just before my PhD defense, 2% of the world population might have this condition, which means approximately 150 million people in the world. And then there was a study conducted by Dr. Swalan and colleagues in John Hopkins University that suggests that there are approximately 14.5 million people, older adults with DSI, dual sensory impairment, in North America by 2036 itself. Prevalence estimate study conducted in Canada based on the Canadian longitudinal studies on aging 2016 data, that 1.11 million older Canadians between the age group of 45 to 85 experience dual sense impairment. But if these are the numbers that we're talking about, where are these individuals? If you're talking about 1.1 million older Canadians between the age group 45 to 85, they are right now in Canada, and our total population is around 36 million. So we're talking about 1 in 40 person. So if they are here, how come we don't see them very often? How come we don't see their research studies coming in very often? And that's what sort of made me to think that how I could use my PhD to sort of bring out some change in the space. So during my PhD, I realized that there is systemic exclusion and social injustice happening with this population. There could be many reasons, but I could just quickly show you some of the examples that I have on the screen. Again, I'm not highlighting only these 3 studies. This is just to give you a flavor of the systemic exclusion that I believe that has been happening with this population with respect to the scientific research that happens. So these are 3 outstanding studies, and if you see on the top, like the title of the study itself, it will show you they're really working on something very unique. Like this study is happening about patient-centered prescription drug label. This is about activity limitation. This is about the confusion assessment method. But all 3 of them have clearly said in their sampling that they will exclude those who have sensory loss content. So that was a motivation that why people are sort of excluding these individuals. And I could realize that yes, it could be because there are communication challenges involved in collecting data. There are challenges in getting consent from these individuals. So rather than sort of going ahead and including them, people often sort of put them on sideline of the research and they are excluded. And this has been happening. So that's what is my intention to highlight today. That often maybe after this talk is done, you will start thinking to bring people on board. So I used my doctoral thesis, which was focused on participation experiences or how to improve their participation in society, which is technically designed for non-disabled population like you and me. So my PhD work resulted to these 4 publications. I'm not going to talk about these, but pretty much I'm proud of this work this is my 5th publication that came out of my PhD. But actually wrote a paper on my own experience of conducting qualitative research with individuals living with developmental. And this was my sort of methodological contribution to the scientific world to highlight that despite the level of challenges or despite the level of disability that these individuals might have, we as a researcher, we could still include them, in our sampling. So again, I have not reached to the level of participatory research that I could include them, but I'm gradually moving to that level. So during my PhD, I would say honestly that I was at that stage that I could not bring people on board from my initial sort of idea inception of my PhD, but still I was able to bring them later on. And then in my postdoc later on, I was able to do that. The unique experience that I had was conducting interviews with these individuals. So if you see on the screen, 16 interviews that I conducted with 16 individuals with blindness in India. So you see the different modes of communication that were used. And one of the most interesting aspects that I could highlight here is like 4 of the individuals who were pretty much more like Helen Keller condition, which was like total deafness and total blindness. They told me that Atul, if you interview us using technology, so you see like there are Facebook, Skype, Facebook. So pretty much these individuals sort of they were using technology, but as a researcher, though I was working in the space of deaf blindness, though I was working and sort of I knew their world very much, but still somewhere in my brain that never came as a answer that why don't I try working with them and collecting data using a technology. So, but the good thing that I did was the thing that I did differently with these with my interviews, that always before going ahead with my interview, I always ask my individual participants that what is your preferred mode of communication? How would you want me to provide the consent form? How would you want me to provide the questions to so that you can read it independently? And so I think that question changed the whole approach of collecting data, and that question changed my whole experience of becoming, I must say, a better researcher. So this is the journey of this whole interview I documented in this paper that I just showed. I would encourage you to just take a look if you are interested in what all I did, because I have just honestly shared my challenges as well as what worked and what did not in this paper. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. Now I'm quickly moving to my postdoc research that I just finished last year. That was about understanding the challenges of older adults, older Canadians with dual sensory loss in Canada during COVID-19 pandemic with respect to their access to healthcare. So imagine that when you think of COVID-19 pandemic, obviously mask, PPE, and everything was part and parcel of this whole thing, and then the physical distancing guidelines. Now think of a person who is old, and then now they have to go through a healthcare system and understand and figure out and navigate the whole clinical setting and go and access care with the doctor, communicate with the doctor who will be sitting far away because of the physical distancing, and they often might have a plexiglass or a mask and everything. And all of these things might have complicated the whole healthcare communication, which is the critical aspect of critical element of providing best care to the individual. I'm not going to talk about this because that's a whole different story for some other day. But the interesting thing that I did during my COVID-19 that I developed a citizen engagement panel for my COVID-19 dual sensory loss study. And in that panel, I had three individuals who had, so one individual, like the three panel members are those who have sensory loss. So one had vision impairment, another person had hearing impairment, and the third person was an older adult with dual sensory loss. So I brought them on board, and they were sort of they were basically guiding this whole work that I have done in my COVID-19 DSL dual sensory loss research in the last 2 years. So with that, it comes with a lot of challenges because every time you are going to organize a meeting, when you think of sending an agenda or thinking of sending out minutes of the meeting, or thinking of sharing the slides with them, everything has to be accessible. And that's what is my learning that so it was a bit of challenge. And then also we submitted a grant to CHR. And imagine that you have to submit a CHR grant and then you want one of the person who had sense impairment, like older adults with dual sensory loss, as a principal knowledge user. Just think of the research like equity and diversity questionnaire and all the questions that you need to complete to get into the CHR portfolio, profile, to get CHR profile. It was really hard for these individuals to sort of create that. But I have communicated to CHR about those challenges, accessibility issues challenges, because one side they want people to be on board as principal knowledge user on the different grants, and on the other side, system is not built properly to sort of support their inclusion on the different grants that we write. So in my COVID-19 dual sensory loss research, I conducted a systematic review that just got published, will be out soon. And then there's study 2, qualitative study with older adults with dual sensory loss and their caregivers. Within this, pretty much using the same learning that I had with with my PhD research, I have sort of advanced it to level that now I basically sort of work with older adults, 32 older adults with dual sensory loss from Quebec and Ontario, and so we conducted qualitative interviews with them. Again, with older adults, it was a whole different learning because some people were very okay with using technology, some people were not. So we have to really customize everything. That the consent form, which had some of the logos has to be removed. So everything was made accessible. And again, the first and foremost learning that I would say, whenever you're conducting any research with any individual with sensory loss, ask them their preferred mode of communication. Don't assume anything because one thing that might work with one person might not work with other. But ultimately, from my research, the main learning that came out was that people need to be trained more on the dual sensory loss specific communication and accessibility needs and accessibility support that are needed for these individuals to get access to information and communicate effectively with others. So part and parcel of the healthcare system. So now sensitive payment specific considerations for accessibility in research. Again, this is coming, I'm pretty sure you all know about it, but I would just like to show it to you so that you can see that these are some of the things that like Braille, again, I don't expect all of you to go and learn about Braille so that you actually can start reading Braille. But what I want, at least you're aware of that mode. You're aware how it works. If you have to provide your questions or your consent form in Braille, yes, you can do that. You know how to go and get a Braille printing done, and then you can provide that. Large print, it's a very simple thing to do, but how many people are really aware and cognizant of asking their participant that, do you need this particular thing or their consent form in large print? Or so in my case, what I have done always that I have always shared my interview guide with my potential participants a week in advance. And that has helped a lot because then they are prepared for the interview session. And then accessible electronic, a lot of documents that we use in research is often in PDF, and PDF might not be accessible at a lot, oftentimes. So that would also, the information provided in written plain language would help a lot. It also now it comes down to the fact that asking them whether they are using a screen reader. If they are using a screen reader, PDF is not going to work. And then there's a whole assistive technology space, which is like, I believe it's very unique and could change the whole scenario of participatory action research and participatory research in the space of sense impairment. So referential braille display is something like this. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this. It works amazing. And my people who I conducted, like whose interview I conducted in India, they use this device a lot, and they cannot communicate. They don't have, like, a lot of individuals who use referential braille display. They often belong to the congenital deaf blindness space where they have really difficulty in seeing and hearing. But with the use of this technology, they can be actually on WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you say. So all the social media platforms, they are on that, and they are able to use these platforms despite that they have difficulty in seeing and hearing. So this could be a game changer if you really know how to use it. Like, actually, one of the interviews that I conducted with these individuals, so basically I was typing my question, and the participant was receiving the question using the referential braille display, and then they were typing it back. So it took me 5 hours to finish my qualitative interview, but that was an experience because I could share that experience with all of you, so that later on you could try that. And things are possible. It's all about sort of thinking beyond the traditional way of doing research. These are some of other examples, but I think it's all about whether you are aware of these and whether you can use some of these in while you conduct your own research. Some of the last, this is almost my last slide. So these are some of the helpful strategies that I believe we all can use. I'll just quickly talk about them. Environmental accessibility. So this aspect, whenever you are conducting research with any individual, I think don't assume that they have or they don't have sense impairment. I think it's better to ask them that whether they have any difficulty in seeing and hearing. And if they have difficulty in seeing and hearing, or a combination of both, ask them what is their preferred mode of communication. And they would tell you, because they are dealing with this loss or impairment in their life day-to-day basis. So they know better how to communicate with you and which mode will be effective in their case. So environmental accessibility, when I'm saying this word, I'm talking about light in the room. I'm talking about like ensuring that there's no glare in the room, there's no excessive noise in the room, there's no clutter in the room where you are conducting this research. And if you're a clinician, I think it's all about ensuring that your clinical setting is free of these things. So environmental accessibility is critical for those who have sensory loss. Accessibility, if you are using any online booking system or online system or telephone system, again check with them or their family members how they communicate. If you're like assuming is not going to work in the space of sensory loss. Take training on sensory impairment specific considerations, like what is sensory loss, and then what all you could do further, so that you have knowledge and skills to actually communicate with them if you are given a chance to work with them using a specific mode of communication. I did those training. That's why I was able to conduct all these sort of interviews. And then optimizing the dual senses. So when we use the word sensory loss or deaf blindness or dual sensory loss, there is still possibility that like only 10% of this population might have severe hearing and vision impairment, which is also called as deaf blindness. But the others might have some residual hearing and vision intact with them, and that you should optimize that. So if you know about them, like one of the interviews that I conducted, actually had to go closer to the one of the right ear and say my question to the person, and then the person will sort of revert back to me. So all these are some of the things I think if we think beyond our traditional way of doing research, these ideas would just come up. And then finally, using accessible format and accessible format that I just showed on my second last few slides, and the use of assistive technology. And ensuring that research information studies, whether it could be recruitment flyer, it could be consent form, it could be data collection tools that we have. I think all of them should be in accessible formats, and we need to be ready with providing accessible format in different modes, which is preferred by our own participants. So these are some of my references, and thank you so much. I'll stop here because I'm sort of one of the inaugural chair of this task force that we have started last year at ACRM. ACRM is American Congress of Rehabilitation in Medicine. It's a network of almost more than 5,000 rehabilitation researchers. So we have started this whole task force to bring people on board who are doing any research, and they would really like to learn how to include people who have sensory loss in their research, despite it's on dementia or it's on any topic. Yeah. Thank you so much. Mercy. Stop here.
Okay, I think the next part is we're just going to spend a few minutes just between the two of us, just kind of reflecting. It was wonderful to hear your talk, and I'm reflecting on some of the alignment of the messages that I included in my talk as well. Part of it, what I find interesting as well, is like there's a lot of intersection between where you and I both kind of do our research, but our journeys are quite different. And I mean, because part of me is just thinking about how our own kind of different experiences, including where we grew up. You're talking about like you have 3 young children. I have 4. Now, all of these types of experiences kind of shape, I guess, how we operate as researchers, right? I think those, our lived experiences aren't divorced from our lives as researchers as well. I don't know what you think about that as well.
I think like both of our talks were very complementary to each other, because like you gave us like more holistic understanding of the picture, and then I brought the sensory loss specific consideration. I really hope that people would be happy to ask questions, and then because I think that will take this whole discussion to a next level, because I still I believe that I'm a disability studies scholar, so I really want, like, the whole idea of this talk was to sort of initiate some sort of dialogue, right? Initiate some sort of, not a movement, but at least some sort of thinking, right? That would lead to a bigger change.
I agree, and I really appreciate your sharing all of the, not only the successes but the challenges that you faced as well. Because that's when I first started in this area. There was always this kind of worry, like I'm going to screw things up, right? And you don't want to be the person who is ableist and exclusionary and things like that. But inevitably, those challenges come up, and we're going to stumble and stuff like that. And so, I appreciate the sharing of both the successes and the problems as well. And the choices that you made as well, in terms of like where you're putting your time and effort towards. So thank you. Brian, maybe we can turn the floor to you.
Great, thanks. Thank you both very much. We're now going to begin the discussion, the audience discussion portion of the seminar. So if you have any questions or comments, please either use the hand raise function, and I'll call your names in the order the hands go up, or if you prefer not to speak, you can type your question in the chat section, and I'd be happy to read it out for you. I'm gonna first though zoom in and start and steal the first question, and I'd like to start to both of you with a kind of context question, because I'm not an engineer, so it's kind of a background context and a question, and it's zooming in on the about us in Nothing About Us Without Us. Where I work, if we do a project on federal accessibility policy, of course we should include persons with disabilities. At least I'd like to say, of course we should, and certainly now it is law that of course we should. But the importance of inclusion with engineering for accessibility begs the question for me: how much do engineers who aren't focusing on accessibility engage in human-centered co-design? Like, in other words, to what extent is a lack of human-centered design where it is lacking a problem necessarily of engineers ignoring persons with disabilities versus kind of an artifact of how engineering work is generally done or isn't done? This is the point. I don't really know.
I mean, I can speak to my experience. So it's an interesting question, in that I think, at least within my experience, so my schooling started in the early 90s in engineering. And engineering at that time was still I mean, it still had that view of a service profession. So the idea of engineering was to use scientific and engineering principles to solve problems for society. But simultaneously tied with it was this view that they used to have this saying, engineers rule the world. And so it felt like engineers were like, above in some ways of others. And I think that what that ended up was what you're talking about, which is it's not necessarily just the exclusion of people with disabilities, but the exclusion of like users in the design process in general. It was this kind of view of like, we have the expertise, we know what's best. And that's starting to change. I think there's a recognition, like there's more design that's being incorporated in engineering, and that includes this participatory design. But I think what we see is that level of challenge as well in terms of who can be included in that. We'll include this because it's easy and convenient, and we know how to interact with people that are more like us. And so even though we have this move towards more stakeholder engagement, there's still this kind of selection and gatekeeping that's happening. I don't know what you think there, Atul.
You say like when I think of this world, there's always this experience of othering, and the othering, the exclusion, and like at different levels. So I believe, again, I'm not commenting on engineers because Dr. Chan, you're also one with them. But in general, I believe like engineers are not trained to think of the diverse population that we have. So I think, but I do have sort of come across a lot of engineers who are really sensitive about others' needs. And the moment that experience has come, then they become very cognizant of designing anything and everything with that mindset that okay, we need to, particular product has to serve a lot more. Because I have like in India I worked with a lot of engineers like who were basically reaching out to me asking me that, Atul, do you have any idea that we could work on together, right? To come up with a prototype, with a design, whatever it could be. And I had the pleasure of working with a lot of people. And so some of them developed communication devices for children with autism. So I must say that it all depends like which school of thought you belong to and what type of change you really want to make in the world. So I believe, but I certainly believe that if people are exposed when they are starting to learn engineering about the diversity and why it is important and why we need to start thinking from the first stage itself that we need this particular product that they are developing is not only sort of going to cater majority non-disabled population, but also needs to take care of the people who are on the margins. So if you start thinking in that way, then their approach is very different. Again, it's going to take a lot more money and effort, but that's how the world will improve. That's how the world will change. But I must say that in last 10 years, like I have not seen the world a lot, but whatever I have seen a change, positive change happening. Equity, diversity, inclusion was not a coin word 5 years ago, but now after coming to Canada, everyone is sort of talking about it. Things are changing, and things have been changing at like different funding sort of level as well, like tri-council level. I believe when tri-council will pick something, others will automatically follow. So hopefully that change is happening, and I think I'm very positive about it.
Right. Thank you both. Dominique, you posted a question in the chat. Would you like me to read that out, or would you like to? Okay, cool. So I'm just transferring to a bigger file here. So I got a question for Professor Dominique Marshall, Carleton University. Question to both of you. Have you met in your respective research work agents in funding agencies who are aware of these barriers to funding and willing to experiment with ways of making their applications and user processes more accessible? And what would you do if you were in their shoes?
Yeah, no, I would say maybe 10 years ago, I actually had a meeting with that included one of the VPs at NSERC. And we were talking about just, this idea of accessibility in research. And there was two parts to that discussion. One was accessibility doesn't fit anywhere. So it's like if I was going to apply to do research through NSERC, engineering and science and stuff like that, it would just not fit in any of the program areas. And so I kind of voiced like, this is an area that we're interested in, but you'll never fund us because it would just be out of scope always. And the other part is on the accessibility side for that can be more inclusive of researchers with disabilities. And that's more of a recent action I start to see with the Accessible Canada Act, because these agencies are federal. They're mandated now to do that. NSERC just went under a consultation for accessibility. They actually reached out to me as one of the to consult with, and they've we're describing some of the issues and barriers that I know exist, and they're fully aware of the problems, many of the problems that exist, some very basic ones, including their portals and stuff like that. And so I think there's a recognition, which is great, that they are far behind. And I think they just released either their initial draft report or their final report on that area. And so I'm encouraged that we're starting to see like some attention that's leading to action towards that.
I would just add here that when I started my postdoc, because my postdoc was Health System Impact Postdoctoral Fellowship that is funded by CHR. So, and my topic was, I believe I was the only Health System Impact Postdoctoral Fellow who was doing something on sensory loss among 76 other like HSIF fellows. So it was interesting, but I was given a chance to share what I was doing. So I was using my research always to sort of sensitize people about the impact of sensory loss and how it could change, right? Like how it could create barriers. So in the similar way, when I started to write grants and then including CHR sort of grants. So when we are applying and we really want to bring these users, like or I'll say people who have sensory disabilities on board as principal knowledge user, and to do that, we really need to they have to complete their own section of paperwork, right? Like the profile has to be created, everything else. So it was a bit of challenge. So again, I was working I was going beyond my own sort of way of doing things and ensuring that somehow we can get those paperwork done. But it was a lot of challenge on both the party, like for me as well as for the other person, because if they need to sign on a document or they need to sign on the full application at the end of the when the application is ready, they cannot go online and do it the way you and me could just sort of go and click on PDF and then we sign it. So again, but I sort of was always, I think these challenges sort of pushed me to think that maybe this is not working, but what would work? And I always having that solution focused approach rather than problem sort of focused approach, sort of that changed my way of doing things. So I learned a lot. And then after everything was done, I submitted my grant. I actually sort of reached out to my CHR people and sort of shared my experiences of challenges that I was going through when I was trying to bring people on board on these grants that I was writing. So, but I must say that, and then sort of that communication happened, and I believe, like again, I cannot sort of connect dot between what I did in my meeting and then what it led to, but I surely can say that things are changing. So after me, there are two more people who have become Health System Impact Fellow, and recently the other sort of person who was from my same lab from University of Montreal, she herself is a PhD from University of Montreal, and she's the first, I will believe, Health System Impact Postdoctoral Fellow at CHR level who has sense impairment herself. So having someone who is having vision impairment as a postdoctoral fellow in the whole cohort itself is gonna change the whole dynamics, because every time whenever they'll be sending any minutes or they'll be sending any agenda or they'll be sending any email, that has to be accessible. And so I believe some changing happening, because I could see like these are some of the small indicators, but I do believe that things are improving. And with respect to the amount of money, like the grants that we could raise, yes, I think during my PhD, I wrote a lot of scholarship on different grants. That was not successful. But after my PhD in last 2.5 years, with my supervisor, like Dr. Walter Wittig at University of Montreal, we were able to raise $592,000 worth of money on topics of sensory loss research. So that itself is one of the indicators, success sort of indicators that yes, things are moving. People are understanding the impact of sensory loss. So I believe things will change. And again, the citizen engagement panel panel that I established within the space of the sensory loss or dual sensory loss research was to, like, I'll be writing a paper on that itself, because that is a whole new learning experience for me. And I believe with that paper, with that methodological paper, it will change. It might, I don't know, say it will change, but it will lead to sort of inform some of the budding investigators or others who could think beyond what I did, because they could do more than what I did.
I can just add I put a link to the NSERC accessibility plan on the chat there, and what you'll see there is like it kind of outlines what they found and what they're planning to do. Some of the things that came about in the consultation with me was I was just describing some of just the systemic kind of issues. A lot of it was based with funding parts of it. So especially over the past few years, we see a number of mental health issues with grad students. And because the way that the funding model is, where it's like you get a fixed amount of funding and then they expect that, you're going to finish with a fixed amount of time, accommodations, things like that just aren't facilitated, in fact, are barriers from that perspective as well. And so, these things I don't think they're challenging and complex issues, of course, but just aren't built into these plans. But again, at least we're seeing some movement forward.
I would just add here that I think once community recognize the challenge, communicate with the respective body, because I still believe that people are still ready to change. Again, if depending on the resources that they have, if it does not require a lot of money, they'll be happily sort of changing that stuff, whatever it could be. If it requires a bit of money, then they again need to get the budget approval. But maybe someone is taking that initiative at there. But at least I think we need to be more responsible of finding those challenges or barriers and sort of identifying them and then documenting and informing the right person who could be the changes for that.
Great. And I'll just read out for everyone. Katie Harwick has put in the chat that SSHRC has recently formed a committee of scholars with disabilities and has ran focus groups to address the accessibility of some of their programming and their application process and online application to grants. And there's me throwing in now, ESDC, their Accessible Canada Directorate is right now in the process of establishing, it's a multi-step process, of course, but establishing indicators to track information communication technology accessibility, which the idea is that would then be applied to everything federal, which, the key is making sure that includes stuff like, did these, how do these forms work? Great. There's a question now from CJ in the chat. Bringing up that not everything, of course, is a physical accommodation. So she asked, how about sensory overload? She finds that when you make improvements, they benefit everyone relating to this. And how do you, in the work you've done so far, incorporate sensory overload into design?
Dr. Chan, would you like to go ahead?
I'll let you start. This probably fits more in your area.
Again, I think maybe CJ, if you can, like, what do you mean by sensory overload? I think that would help me to exactly pinpoint what I believe.
So things like lighting. If you don't have natural light and you're in fluorescent lighting all day, I can start to melt down pretty quickly. I didn't know that as a child, but as an adult, I seem to gravitate to outside offices, and I did much better. My mood was better. I was more productive. But that goes for everyone. If you build a room with an atrium, with a lot of window lighting, it tends to improve everyone's moods, not just the person with the sensory overload. Things like fabric textures, wall colors, it's part of the inclusive design or, you've been talking about. So it's just, I don't think it's just people with a physical impairment that you have to think about.
think I'm also an occupational therapist by training, so I could totally relate to that aspect of sensei integration and sensei overload. So thank you for elaborating more on that. So I think the biggest challenge that I believe is we often assume rather than asking people that what they would like to have, we often assume in sort of doing things around people, right? Like exactly the same example that you just talked about the fluorescent light or how much light you want. I think I think people often sort of assume that yes, this is a comfortable light for me, so it applies to everyone in the room, right? But that might not be the case. I think we really need to be sort of mindful of the different, like the not of sensory needs, but also the different needs of people who are in the same sort of space with us. So if we start thinking that way, being more cognizant of others' sort of concerns and needs and their experiences, it will certainly improve. So I totally relate.
Mhm. Or things like cubicles, where people are leaning over the barriers and talking to each other, and some people love the chit chat and the water cooler atmosphere, whereas I'd prefer a room with a door or an area where you can go and be alone for a few minutes and maybe eat your lunch in peace. Um, it just too much. I get peopled out, so I can do a limited amount of socializing, but then I really need to focus on my work. So those interruptions can be very disturbing to my ability to work.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments as well. It's interesting because the Abilities Living Lab, as we're undergoing the implementation of it, there's all these kind of details, carpeting and colors and stuff like that. And you're right, as we were going through carpet selection, there was a design presented and which was rejected. We rejected it because we're like, it's too busy. It causes an accessibility issue from a sensory perspective. And then on the other side, in terms of lighting, we got some research equipment that's put in there to look at things like that. So we're looking at circadian lighting as well. As you said, it benefits everyone, right? From a health and wellness perspective. And if you look at it from a health and wellness perspective, that's an accessibility issue, right? And so whether it causes, a very acute sensory overload or is just, is helpful from a health and wellness perspective for everyone, it is an accessibility issue.
Maybe this could be the next thing to be considered by HR while they hire, right? So that okay, what all accommodations you need. So I think when I see there are current accommodation sort of the tools or guidelines that are presented by HR when they hire, may not consider all these things, but maybe this could be the next thing to do.
And Keenan has his hand up. Or
That's true.
Keenan, please.
Thanks. Sorry about the lighting. It wasn't dark when this started. Running off my phone lights. I just want to go back first to, I guess it was so long ago now, Adrian's chart about the experience of people at the ski hill. That was great. I work mostly with people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons, so a bit different, but a lot of the assumptions about what will exclude people from experiences typically in a similar way focuses on all the wrong things. The transportation, the money, and all these sorts of things. And then if you do that kind of an analysis, you find out there was all these other experiences, like no one talked to them while they were there. For example, that definitely ruins your social experience. But I also appreciated the recent comments about workplaces, because we've been working with the federal government for about 7 years on recruitment, hiring, and retention of people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons. And, their focus on assessments related to technical skills and things, those can all be learned. But what is much more important is what type of environment is this? Highly social? Do you work on your own? Do you work in teams? And these are almost always the top predictors. So it's so interesting when people go around sort of inclusive design and overlook, if they would just, what I think both of you were saying, if they would just listen to the people who have the experience of this, they would tell them what the important things are. But it's been great to see there's been a lot of changes, especially around practices around interviews and onboarding where questions that are pretty much irrelevant to job performance were excluding people from jobs, and they've redesigned those to include people focused on what the job would actually be and what type of environment they'd be in. Yeah, I just found it really interesting, and I can't wait to get a hold of the slides. I want to see that slide again with the analysis of the skiing experience, because it was done in for me anyways, exactly what we're always trying to communicate to people about how you go about supporting someone to have an inclusive experience. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll dump in the chat as well if you like that piece of research. Lindsay was a fantastic student, and you can see her entire thesis. That was just one of the participants. She interviewed a number of participants, and so you can see each individual, of course, has a different experience. But there are some themes that come through there. What was interesting to me was that these other parts outside of the actual skiing were oftentimes the problems.
Are you going to be saving the chat, the stuff that's aimed at everyone, so we can have a list of these resources in chat?
Or are we going to be saving it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm recording the thing, so it'll download.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I have another resource I just added. That's
sure.
Just came out. So.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Atul.
It's also there, so hopefully it can be sort of saved.
Got another question from Dominique. Is there a role for university ethics boards in this? Have you worked with them, and how's that gone in the past?
Yeah, I mean, there is a role. The one that comes straight to mind, of course, is more of the issue of gatekeeping as well. I remember I threw in ethics application, which included participants with disabilities. And they're like, oh, no, this has to be a high risk kind of thing because you're working with the vulnerable population. And I'm like, well, why do you automatically think that they're a vulnerable population? I was like, no, there was, from a consent perspective, I said, I don't think there's any issue here. And so it was a good conversation back and forth about this. And they came to the conclusion as well. It was like my inclusion exclusion criteria was fine, and that my inclusion of persons with disability isn't automatically default as a highly vulnerable population. And so I think that type of change, I think, is important to see. And then the other parts of it, I think, that could be perhaps more proactive is that the inclusion part of it, right, is you're looking at the methodologies and stuff like that. What provisions are you there or making there that ensures inclusion? Because oftentimes just the methodology itself prevents other folks from being included. And I'm not too sure how this will be a challenge because, as you can see from Dr. Jaiswal's methodology, it's about being flexible, right? And so you can adapt to meet the individual needs. And so is it going to be that every time you need to adapt that you have to have a change of protocol form too, which would become like another barrier for inclusion as well?
So basically, I'll add based on my experience while I was doing my PhD. So during my PhD at Queen's, it was again hard to get my PhD thesis, like PhD study ethics approval ready in one shot. I think it was a lot of back and forth between me and the ethics committee. But I think I always I always take these challenges as something, as a good learning for me as a researcher, as well as this also is an opportunity for me to sort of educate others, because if through my experience, though it's taking a little longer to get my ethics, like my other peers had, like the ethics approval was done in like 3 weeks. For me, it took me 2 months. So I think it's all about whether you have that patience, right, to go through and like have the struggle or have the discussion or have the dialogue with these individuals. And I totally relate that people who are on the other side, like who are right now preventing this idea or the change of this idea, they are not good, they're not bad people. They also wanted to do things like people who are working in consent space or privacy space. They have good reasons to do what they're doing. It's also about, I think, taking this opportunity to sort of sensitize or educate others about what this topic is all about. So again, I have to, like, when I presented my, like when I proposed my idea of collecting data, like conducting interviews with these individuals who have combined hearing and vision loss, it was a bit of a challenge. Even my own department, so my department was School of Rehab Therapy. Technically, everyone is getting trained in occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and we work with disabilities. But again, it was a bit of a challenge for my own department to understand how is Atul going to conduct interviews with someone who's like Helen Keller. So that was a whole different alien concept because no one has done this type of research at Queen's like what I did. But again, I think that I take that as an opportunity because if I do this, it will open doors for many others who will come after me. So I think this approach has changed my life, and I think so. I had never imagined that my PhD would lead to this postdoc fellowship and everything else that will come later. But I think whatever sort of I took the difficult path every time, and that difficult path has helped me grow further, and that difficult path have pretty much opened the doors for others. And I'm pretty sure now if someone else would apply for ethics approval at Queen's, people would be more considerate of all these nuances that because they learned through me from my application.
Great, great. Thank you. I've got a question from Beata. Do you have a research ethics code or safety guide that you apply during participatory research and design? Thank you. And I'll just kind of throw a sub question in there. To what extent is it specific to persons with disabilities as opposed to just the normal code, right? Or did the normal code already cover it?
There's not one in particular that I use. It's kind of, I'm trying to figure this out as I kind of go along, and so it's often pulled from a number of different places, I guess. So, for example, there are some good guidelines for engaging with Indigenous populations, which I think is very applicable to other historically excluded communities as well. There was a good resource I remember from the Center for Community Engagement coming out of the University of Guelph that talked about it wasn't specifically participatory research, but more community engaged research, which overlaps quite a bit. It had some nice guidance in there, and so it's often pulled from a different number of sources there. But some of it's also a bit absent as well. This idea of, I think, of long-term reciprocal kind of relationship is sometimes not talked about well within in some of these guidelines, and so part of it is through, part of it's through experience and practice and sharing of knowledge. But if someone has a good guideline, that'd be fantastic.
I think, Beata, thank you for asking this question because I believe this is a wonderful research idea that you just shared. Right, I must say that maybe someone from here or some student can take this topic and develop something, because I don't think, like in my sort of last 10 years of research, I have not come across something like this. So this could be really helpful down the line for others. So yeah, not sure where you are in your career trajectory, Beata, but I think this is a wonderful topic to pick.
The Accessibility Institute at Carleton is currently trying to put code would be too prescriptive, but I'm not saying it would be. Code would be over gilding it, but a kind of research guide for participatory research. Now we're doing it for our own purposes, but ideally we would spread it to anyone interested, at least, to use as the basis of something. Okay, I've got another question from Dominique to Adel. You brought up, what you've said could call for working with statisticians. And have you worked with some of their professional associations? If I've understood that question properly.
Yeah, because I meant there's a lot of sampling or bad sampling. So the statisticians, that's what they do, they sample. So I was just wondering if you have worked in that direction.
Okay, so it's very interesting that you have asked this question, but my spouse who currently works at Statistics Canada. So she actually works with all the data sets, and we keep on sort of discussing this in the house that okay, how different data sets that Stats Canada has, uh, like not often like have the good representation of people because the Canadian Survey on Disability sort of the survey is designed in a way that talks about like a cohort of the larger population, right? It talks about one sample that, and often the methodology itself is not the best. Like you, like the surveyor has to go into a house, ask the person who the person was met, and then ask whether they have a family member who is having disability. So and based on that answer, the further questions will be asked or not asked, right? So it can go either way around. So I think there is a lot of scope of change. There's a lot of scope of change, but I have also seen a lot of like senior level people in Stats Canada who are right now sort of who have sense impairment and they are now at sort of director level position. So I believe they have already started the movement. Maybe it's not visible because we are not there. And often I must say that like even though I shared today my success story, right? There are a lot of challenges behind these sort of stories that I have just shared. Like the 18 months of journey that I just showed you on those 4 slides, I failed many times, and then that's what led to the next step. So it's also about like not stopping though you have failed a lot of times. So I believe that Stats Canada or a different sort of statistician, uh, I think things are changing. It's all about making them understand the nuances of like the wrong sampling and how it would impact because the current so I like we worked on 2 different papers that came out of Canadian Survey on Disability data that talked about hearing loss and vision loss and what type of sort of like whatever inferences that we could get. And again, that was more about employment and education opportunities. So those papers that came out, I think, in 2020, yeah, and they were all sort of using the Canadian Survey on Disability. And then in that paper itself, we have highlighted the limitations of Canadian Survey on Disability itself. So, but I must say that after the paper was released and like published, I have seen the change in the Canadian Survey on Disability itself. So I've seen some new questions being added up. So again, I could connect the dot that how one thing maybe it's not my research that has led to that change. I cannot take the credit for that, but I must say that there is some change happening, positive change happening. So I believe gradually, even statistician world, a statistic sort of people, statistician who are working in this space of disability or in general health or in general sort of any data, they would be sort of more active and more as a welcoming in sort of including others and having a sample that is more diverse and representative of all Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, this idea of statistics is always difficult, right? I think often statistics are used to describe things at a population level, right? And the challenge, and I think the trap is when you try to take those population level kind of ideas and apply it to individuals. Individuals, of course, differ, and so what you end up with statistics is that you're covering kind of like the 80 or 90%, and then missing out on the extremities, right? And so there's always a challenge, even within if you're trying to focus on the disability community, it's not a monolith in itself, right? And so even though if you can generate some data and provide some statistics, it covers that subpopulation, but still will not generalize to every individual as well.
Great. That's everything I currently have. Does anyone else have any questions? Right. Adrian, Atul, do you have any remaining questions you'd like to ask each other?
No, I'm just looking forward to having a chance to meet Atul in person because I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to work together.
That's what we wanted to do, create connections between wonderful scholars. Great. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, everyone, for participating, for the questions. Thank you to Dominique and Natalie for setting this up and running everything behind the scenes. But most of all, thank you. I'd like everyone to again join me visually again in thanking our speakers, Adrian and Natalie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.